Hey, welcome to Crossroads, folks. We have a special episode today. You can see here with us is Roman Balmakov, host of Facts Matter, and we're going to be co-hosting the show today. We're going to be talking mainly about how illegal immigrants are being given voting rights. And Roman, I was watching videos on it. It seems the people defending it, they keep saying, you know what? It's all a lie. They can't vote in federal elections. What do you say to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what Jerry Nadler says over and over again in the halls of Congress, that no matter what you say about them voting at the local level, at the school board level, he's like, well, they can't vote at the national level. They can't vote in national election.
Yeah.
That's right.
See, this is the important point with it. Whenever they get accused of saying that, illegals are getting rights to vote in the United States, they keep trying to push that aside by saying they can't vote in federal elections. But that's not the issue. The issue is they're legalizing illegal immigrants voting in our elections at the municipal level.
Well, that's one way that is shaping the political landscape. Because on the municipal level, in certain localities where the state constitution doesn't forbid it, it's getting open and open. More states are introducing it. We'll go through exactly which states allow it now, which states are pushing for it, which local areas as well. But that's not the only way. We'll go through every way, like congressional appropriations, the electoral college, as well as just the push to grant amnesty to these illegal immigrants, which
would then give them voting rights for the federal elections as well.
That's right.
Yeah, so real quick, those of you watching on Crossroads or Facts Matter on YouTube, about halfway through, we're going to jump over to Epoch TV. We'll be doing the live Q&A there, so if you have questions, you can ask for Roman or I over there. So again, join us on Epoch TV, epochtv.com, link in the description if you want to post any questions or comments, and let's jump into it. So Roman, I want to start by talking about the Mexican president because, of course, he just did this big interview. And in it, frankly, it looks like he's trying to extort the United States. He's being accused of this. So let's show you the clip and we'll go into it.
If they don't do the things that you've said need to be done, then what?
The flow of migrants will continue.
Your critics have said what you're doing or what you're asking for to help secure the border is diplomatic blackmail. What do you say?
I'm speaking frankly. We have to say things as they are. And I always say what I feel. I always say what I think.
Now look, what this guy is saying, the Mexican president, he's saying, yeah, hypothetically I can secure the border. But if I do it, I'm going to need a few things from the United States to be able to do it. That includes lifting sanctions on Venezuela, ending the trade embargo to Cuba, legalizing millions of Mexicans living in the United States, which would, of course, deeply affect the elections, and also send him $20 billion, send $20 billion a year to Latin American countries. What does that have to do with him just like enacting border security?
Yeah, I mean, it's been said a million times, but the political arena is the dirtiest arena in human endeavors. Like, you don't get a dirtier area of human life than politics. I mean, really, in some areas, like in some industries, you might kill someone to get a little bit of power, but in the political arena, you'll ruin a country. You'll ruin a generation to get a little bit of leverage or power. And I'm not just talking about the Mexican president. I mean, if you go back and you listen 15 years ago to what Joe Biden was saying about the border, it sounds eerily similar to the Republican position. But over the last, let's say, 4 years, what he's doing is significantly different than what he was saying. Now, you can say that he legitimately changed his position. That's possible. People do change their thinking. But because it's so dramatic, it's either, in my opinion, this is just my analysis, either it's sort of a Machiavellian play to get more people into the country for various reasons, voting perhaps one of them, but also even the economic numbers. If you see the economy is doing great, when you dig into it, it's all non-citizens that are getting the jobs, right? So the jobs reports are great. That's one reason. The other reason is maybe just to placate the left, right? There's this narrative saying, hey, we need to open these borders, and there's a coalition in the Democrat Party to placate that side of it. So that's on the sort of Democrat Joe Biden administration side. But on the Mexican side, they're playing the exact same game from their perspective. And if I was him, I would do the exact same thing. Right now, it's an election year. The border is actually backfiring because
it's becoming one of the biggest issues for the elections.
That's right.
And frankly, it's one of the things that makes Biden look the worst.
Yeah.
Because, this is my thinking too. I don't think Biden really wants the Mexican government to close the border, because why would Biden be suing Texas trying to stop Texas, for example, from securing the border if Biden wanted to secure the border. Like, you know, the facts don't line up. On one side, they're saying one thing. On another side, they're saying another thing. And these things don't align with each other, which makes, this is my thinking. I think that they want to have the Mexican president pretend like he's the one responsible for it and he's writing it off like, oh, America is destabilizing Latin America. And so if America wants us to stop mass illegal immigration, you have to fix Venezuela and fix Cuba. By doing that, he's blaming Biden and blaming the United States for the problems they have in those countries, these communist countries, basically. And he's saying you need to give us $20 billion a year to, you know, help us out, right? So they're, in my opinion, he's kind of like trying to punt the ball to make it look like it's the Mexican president's fault, and the Mexican president is also playing the game of this by suggesting that it's Biden's fault and America's fault that Latin America has the problems it has.
Yeah. I mean, this is an aspect of the dirtiness of politics, right? It's all optics. I mean, in theory, the problem, like you mentioned, can be fixed extremely easily. But when you're juggling two balls in the completely different directions, you're suing Texas to keep the border open. Then you're doing this public spat with Mexico. Oh well, I'd love for you to help us to close the border, but you want all these things. I wouldn't be surprised that as we get closer to the election, these negotiations will get drawn out. Some kind of an agreement will be reached, and maybe Mexico will deploy National Guard troops, which, by the way, it's shocking that they don't. In fact, I've seen videos of the Mexican National Guard troops actually helping the border crossers get from Central America up through Mexico to the U.S. southern border. So, it's not like there are just neutral parties here. They are actually facilitating what's happening.
Well, one thing we've been going into in this show quite a bit is that actually it's part of an agreement. Like Biden is part of a compact with Mexico and a lot of other countries, again, the Global Compact for Migration, where they've agreed to facilitate this. And it's not just Mexico, it's Panama. When I was in Panama, we saw it firsthand. We have it on video. It's in, for example, Costa Rica. It's in Mexico. They just put people on buses and they send them north to the northern border and drop them off because that's part of the agreement. I think if Biden really wanted to close the border or secure the border, he would just pull the United States out of the Global Compact for Migration. And they're not even talking about it. They try to pretend the whole thing doesn't even exist.
So we played earlier the clip from 60 Minutes. And when was that clip shot? That was just a few days ago, right?
It was recent, yeah.
Recent. Yeah. So there was another meeting on January 8th of this year, so basically just 3 months ago at the beginning of the year. So it was a meeting between Blinken, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, and the President of Mexico. And he basically laid out the exact same thing, Now, of course, if you're watching and you're not aware, the current Mexican president is very left. I mean,
he's a communist.
He's a communist. I mean, he's
a
socialist, but in the context of Mexico, sure, he's a communist.
He's a conservative like Fidel Castro was, where Fidel Castro was like, I'm not a socialist. Who's a socialist? I'm not a socialist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So already 3 months ago, he laid out the exact same thing: approval of the U.S. to deploy $20 billion to Latin American and Caribbean countries, suspend the blockade of Cuba, remove all sanctions against Venezuela, and grant at least 10 million Hispanics living in the U.S. the right to remain and work legally. Now, you might say, wow, the Biden administration would never go for that. Well, look at this. Look at this. An article from January 20th, 2021. January 20th, 2021. This is at the very beginning of the Biden administration. This is what it says. Newly sworn in Joe Biden unveiled legislation on Jan 20th, which is basically like his first week in office, I believe his first day in office, that would create a pathway to citizenship for the roughly 10 to 12 million undocumented immigrants living in the United States. It was the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021. So it's like you look at this story with Mexico and you're like, wow, the Mexican government, what's their plans?
Yeah, how dare they demand that Biden give 10 million people like citizenship? Yeah,
guys, it's happening. Now
it was Biden's plan, not the Mexican president's plan. In other words,
there's more happening behind the scenes than meets the eye.
Yeah.
Now,
but if you remember, that was when Biden was on the campaign trail, and back in 2020, when he was campaigning from his basement and from the car parks and stuff like that. He was actually saying that he wanted to give citizenship to illegal immigrants. That was one of the main things that he was saying he was going to do as soon as he took office.
That's right.
Yeah, and here you have it again. They actually talked about it.
Well, it died. I mean, it died in the, I believe, the 117th Congress during the first congressional session of his administration. And I mean, I assume he knew that it would die. It's all a show.
Yeah, maybe this is the game, though, right? Pretend you want to secure the border, sue Texas and other states when they try to, so you can play this stupid international game. Have your commie buddy in Mexico say that if you want to secure the border, we need to give citizenship to 10 million people, which was your agenda in the first place, and then use that to say, I've secured the border by giving all the illegal aliens citizenship. But look at my magic wand go,
I mean, this is the game. This is how it works. And I mean, this was, 3 years ago? But we'll talk about later in the show. I mean, there's a renewed call to give green cards to illegals.
That's on the table again. Biden's bringing it up. So I want to talk about some of the voting rights stuff real quick. All right, so folks, if you hear that they say that illegal immigrants cannot vote in federal elections, the whole thing is a giant conspiracy theory. Anybody who says otherwise is a dangerous disinformation spreader and is a danger to themselves and others, right? If they suggest this, they're playing a game of words with you, because the reality is the Democrats are, in fact, clearing the way for illegal immigrants to vote in elections. In fact, as we speak right now, the technicality, real quick, is between federal elections and municipal elections. They can vote at the local level. Already, these include in Alabama, Arizona, Colorado, Florida, Louisiana, North Dakota, and Ohio. And again, it's a growing list. They're trying to expand it right now. According to Ballotpedia, there's also the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., and they've expanded this as well to in California, Maryland, and Vermont. And as of March 2024, Ballotpedia, 6 states have decided on 6 ballot measures related to citizenship requirements for voting since 2018. Voters approved each one, and so this is moving forward. Again, that's Iowa, Kentucky, and Wisconsin. So not only can illegal immigrants vote in several states already, they're trying to expand it already. And real quick, let's show you this clip from Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, and we'll show you this. We'll talk more about it.
Can I ask, Mr. Chairman, you're from New York. Thanks to New York City's council, beginning January 9th, 2023, more than 800,000 non-citizens will be eligible to vote in municipal elections in New York. Do you agree with that policy?
No, non-citizens will not be eligible to vote in New York. They never have been. Well, they were in the 19th century eligible to vote in New York.
Well, no, this is a recent action. It was just passed in December.
No, that is not correct. Non-citizens have not been eligible to vote in New York or, as far as I know, in any other state since the 19th century.
That's not true. The New York City Council voted in December to allow this. It begins January 9, 2023. Cities in Vermont and Maryland already allow this, and similar measures are under consideration in Illinois, Maine, and Massachusetts right now.
If the gentleman will yield?
Yes.
I believe those are considerations of allowing votes in municipal elections only.
Right, but thank you. That's the point. Everybody wants to know at home, why would they allow this? Guys, they're allowing it because they're going to turn them into voters. They already are doing this in New York City, largest city in America, and this is the plan of our friends on this side to turn all the illegals into voters.
Yeah, so there you have it, right? Real quick, just to clarify, I think I misread that. Alabama, Arizona, Colorado, Florida, Louisiana, North Dakota, and Ohio, those are the states where they voted where they cannot vote. But in other states, they're, of course, clearing the way for it. So which ones do they have where you can currently vote?
So, yeah, like you mentioned, ever since the migrant crisis really began in earnest, well, I mean, it's been going on for a while, but when Trump brought it to the public sphere, states have been moving in 2 separate directions. Like the states you mentioned, the 7 states, those are the ones where they amended the state constitution to actually explicitly say that non-citizens cannot vote. Iowa, Kentucky, and Wisconsin will also have referendums on that issue as well. But then moving in the other direction, you have over a dozen municipalities right now in this country where illegals can vote in the local elections. So you have 2 cities in California. You have San Francisco and Oakland, where illegal immigrants, illegal aliens, they can vote in these school board elections. Oakland's a little bit complicated. there's one more hurdle before they can, but it's basically almost across the finish line. Washington, D.C. is a very interesting case. Basically, all local elections illegal immigrants can vote in as long as they're above the age of 18 and have lived in Washington, D.C. for 30 days. So there is a requirement there. You do have to have lived in Washington, D.C. for 30 days, so that is a fat requirement there.
Even if you're illegally living there.
That's exactly. And we'll talk about the Washington, D.C. case a little bit further because that case is very exemplative. But besides Washington, D.C., you have 10 different communities in the state of Maryland, and I printed them out right here. Barnesville, Cheverly, Chevy Chase, Garrett Park, Glen Echo, Hyattsville, Martins Additions, Mountain Rainier, Riverdale Park, Somerset, Tacoma Park, and that's it. So those are the 10 municipalities in Maryland where illegal aliens can vote in the local elections. And then you also have the case of Vermont where there are 2 cities where, I'm sorry, no, it was 2 cities initially, but then Burlington was added on as well. So 3 cities in Vermont. So Burlington, Montpelier, I've only actually read that city's name. I hope that's the way you pronounce it. And Winooski.
Okay. We don't pay attention to that here.
I one time heard Josh pronounce Arkansas as Arkansas, just FYI.
These are ridiculous accusations.
So okay, so those are the over 12 municipalities that illegals can currently vote in. So you might say there's a lot to unpack there. So let's start at why it matters.
Well, let's talk about briefly Nadler being like, they can't vote in federal elections. Every time he's questioned, they can't vote. That's his response. They can't vote in federal elections. But as you mentioned, the issue is they're trying to skew the facts by pointing to the federal elections when that's not what people are talking about. They're talking about changes to the laws and, of course, allowing illegals to vote at different levels of the government, not yet federal elections, but that's part on the plate, too. But back to your point.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There was a law passed in 1996 outlawing non-U.S. citizens from voting in federal elections. So that is true. So at the federal level, it's a serious crime to vote. If you're a non-citizen, you can easily get kicked out of the country. At the local level, though, it's expanding. Because, like we mentioned, some states are moving in the direction of outlawing it, but other states where it's a little bit, there's some gray area. Like, for instance, some states have in their constitution that all U.S. citizens have the right to vote. But it doesn't say that non-U.S. citizens don't have the right to vote. So in those states where it's a little bit, like Vermont is a good example. That's exactly what it is in Vermont, and that's what happened. But the reason
what a game to play. It's like being like, well, you said only humans can vote, but you never said that cats can't vote and that I can't vote for my cat.
Exactly. Well said.
You didn't say I couldn't do this very specific thing.
So if you remember back to 2020, during the DNC primaries, if you looked at that stage, it was a big stage. Tons of different candidates. You had Kamala Harris, the young woman from Hawaii. What's her name?
I can't remember.
Okay, so you had like, I believe, 10 candidates in total. But 2 of those candidates were mayors. You had Pete Buttigieg and Mayor Bill de Blasio, right? And so you might say, well, what does it matter that these illegals are voting in local elections? Well, because in America, there's a pipeline in the realm of politics, right? At the local level, you gain support, you gain a constituency, you get elected, and then from the local level, you might become a governor, or let's say from city council, you might become a mayor, then a governor, then a state representative, a representative at the federal level, then the president. Some people skip that. Pete Buttigieg is a good example. Mayor Bill de Blasio, he gained a national profile. But if those people, if their constituency is no longer U.S. citizens, and instead in those areas you can have illegal aliens, I don't know what else to call them, just illegal aliens voting, then your constituency is no longer U.S. citizens. You're not looking out for the benefits of U.S. citizens per se, especially in the case of New York, for instance, where they're still trying to pass this bill. Well, they already passed it, but it's getting challenged legally, where they're trying to have 800,000 illegal aliens voting in the local elections. Well, if you're, let's say, running for mayor of New York, that's a national profile position. But then in order to get that position, you're going to placate this population of illegal aliens, which is completely separate and distinct from U.S. citizens, in the sense that, look, this gets to the sort of the heart of the question. How are illegal aliens different than U.S. citizens? And the answer is, I believe, very simple. People like Josh and I, U.S. citizens, we are able-bodied, and our goal is to get the government off our backs.
Basically.
The government depends on us. We don't depend on the government. Yeah. We want the government to police the streets and to provide defense for the nation. And that's pretty much it. I mean, maybe a few other things.
And not tax us so hard.
Exactly. Everything
You know what
else
I mean?
hopefully can go by the wayside.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, maybe a few things, but generally, the relationship between a citizen and their government is that the citizen upholds the government. Well, the citizen does not need the government needs the citizen. It's like a necessary evil. A citizen looks at the government as a necessary form of evil. Illegal alien, on the other hand, is in this country at essentially not the beck and call, but like because the government just allows them to be here. At a moment's notice, they know that they can be kicked out of the country, right? So it's a totally different dynamic relationship.
Well, and they know that the elections will get them kicked out of the country
Exactly.
if it goes in the other direction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's a completely different dynamic between an illegal alien and a U.S. citizen. And for instance, in the case of New York, I think we're going to talk about this later in the program as well, but now they're handing out debit cards worth
they are.
$1,400 refillable every single month, paid for by U.S. taxpayers.
We'll go over all the stuff they're giving them. It's insane. It's not even just like debit cards. It's a whole list of stuff.
Yeah, but so see, that dynamic is significantly different. And so if that's your constituency that you're trying to placate in order to gain office, I mean, that's a whole different game, and that is not what the founders of this country envisioned. If you look back at the early form of government that we had, the U.S. Constitution, it explicitly said that the states can determine the place and time of elections, as well as who can vote in elections. Now, of course, over time that's changed. You know, many amendments have been added so that women can vote, black people can vote, people over the age of 18 can vote, et cetera. There have been.
You don't need to be a landowner.
Exactly.
Stuff, yeah.
But at the no, the landowner thing was actually state level, so that wasn't at the federal level. But the point was, in the beginning, a lot of people kind of dismiss it as like, oh, those were the white men trying to uphold their patriarchy and the racist superstructure that was there. That's one way to look at it. That's sort of a deconstructive way to look at it, based on like sort of a Marxist theory. I won't dismiss it outright, but I'll just put that aside for the moment. Another way to look at it is that the framers of America, not the Constitution, but of America, they wanted a proxy for people to vote in elections, so that the people voting had a stake in what was happening in the country. And the proxy they used was male. White is sort of it's a non-issue because I believe the amount of free blacks in America at the time was negligible, and so blacks were essentially at that time synonymous with enslaved people. So you could just say slaves who weren't voting, and everyone else was white. So to say white male is a little bit whatever, just white male landowners. And those are the people who were able to provide for themselves. They were homesteaders. They could provide food, water, shelter, protection for their family members. And so their relationship with the government is exactly what I was describing, that the government needed them. They did not need the government. And so it was that sort of a dynamic. And so you compare that to 2024, when you have illegal aliens who are here at the absolute mercy of the government. They can get kicked out at any moment. They're getting housed by the government. They're getting paid by the government.
Fed by the government.
Fed by the government. It's a master, like that's an actual slave relationship. That's like a lord-master relationship between illegal aliens and the government versus U.S. citizens and the government. So that's sort of like everything we're discussing today. You have to keep that in mind, as if this continues going down this road and more and more illegals into the country, more and more municipalities allow them to vote, the politicians that are going to rise up will be placating this demographic, and the entire polity of America will be shifting in that process.
Yeah. Because the demands from government are utterly different from these individuals who they're going to be having to basically serve. And as we've seen too, that they do vote Democrat. That's what flipped California from a Republican state to a Democrat state, was when, of course, Reagan gave voting rights gave citizenship to all the illegal aliens who were living in California. They know that this has happened in the past. Now, folks, we're going to be going into, again, not just them giving voting rights to illegal immigrants at the local levels and so on, but also how Biden is talking about amnesty. He's talking about giving them green cards. This is on the table right now. These things are being discussed. And,
and also, just one thing I want to point out. It's very easy to, in this sort of a discussion, talk about, oh, the Democrats are here and the Republicans are here, and it's like, Republicans are trying to stop this. Democrats are trying to push it.
It's not all Republicans trying
It's
to
not
stop
over.
it.
Let me give you two concrete examples, okay? The case of Vermont. So Vermont, like I mentioned, in their state constitution, it says every person who is a citizen of the United States is entitled to vote, okay? But it doesn't say people who are not citizens are not entitled to vote. And so what the state legislature did was they passed a bill, two bills allowing non-citizens to vote. But here's the interesting thing about how this actually played out. The governor of Vermont is a Republican, right? Vermont has it's kind of a unique area. I mean, if you follow like the national elections, Vermont is one of those unique places where you can have like a Republican governor and a legislature that's Democrat. So Phil Scott, he's a Republican. He decided to not sign the two bills. He vetoed them, right? But he vetoed them not because he didn't agree with those bills. It wasn't that he didn't agree that you should give those two cities the right to have non-citizens vote. But instead, he said that it shouldn't be the few cities and it should actually be the entire state. Let me just read to you the quote from Phil Scott, the Republican governor of Vermont, on why he vetoed the two bills. This is a quote. Quote, "This is an important policy discussion that deserves further consideration and debate. I understand these charter changes are well-intentioned, but I asked the legislature to revisit the issue of non-citizen voting in a more comprehensive manner and develop a statewide policy or a uniform template and process for those municipalities wishing to grant the right of voting in local elections to all legal residents." Think about that. The legislature, you're the governor. The legislature gives you two bills saying, hey, we want illegal aliens to vote. You say, well, I'm not signing these. Come back to me with a more comprehensive bill for the whole state, right? This is not a Republican versus Democrat issue necessarily.
He's like, this isn't broad enough. I want them all.
Exactly.
Basically.
Another good, before we move on, I just want to give one more example because you might say, well, that's just Vermont. Georgia. Recently, Georgia had a bill working its way through the House to explicitly ban non-citizens from voting. And just in case you're not aware, the House political, so this is the breakdown of the state House in Georgia. 102 Republicans, 78 Democrats. So it's overwhelmingly Republican. The Georgia state legislature, overwhelmingly Republican. They didn't pass it, just in the House. Forget the Senate. It died in the House. The bill to make sure that non-citizens were not allowed to vote in Georgia, it died in the House, even though Republicans have a near supermajority. So this is not a Democrat versus Republican issue. This is a more, I don't know what you would call a philosophical issue between people who agree that non-citizens should be voting and those who don't. And it seems to cut, I guess, what's that old saying? Through the heart of every man rather than through the heart of a political party.
Yeah. All right, that said, folks, we're going to be continuing this episode on Epoch TV, EPOCHTV.com. We'll go into questions as well and also some more stories. So come join us on Epoch TV.
That's epochtv.com. That's EPOCHTV.com. The link will be right there in the description box below. Head on over there. We've got a lot more stories to cover, including more details about where and how these non-citizens are voting. And also, if you want to ask any questions of Josh and myself, not limited to things related to voting. If you want to ask personal questions, I know many people are wondering about Josh's personal life. You can head on over to Epoch TV and ask away.
Yeah. Let's jump into a quick ad from our sponsor, and then we'll go further into